I'm Liz Fallbliss, and this is Currents. Happy anniversary to Pope Benedict. Plus, a big announcement from the Holy See for religious sisters here in the U.S. And a Catholic academy imparts some wisdom from above.
We have a sense of community here and a sense of faith here. It is the only place in Douglaston where you can go and learn about math and science. You'll also learn about the teachings of Jesus Christ.
A full-scale overhaul of one of the largest group of nuns in the United States. That declaration comes straight from the Vatican by way of a report from the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, and it's aimed at the Leadership Conference of Women's Religious. The group represents the women who lead around 57,000 religious sisters. Now, the Leadership Conference was accused of taking positions that undermine Roman Catholic teaching on the priesthood and homosexuality. Church officials also say LCWR promoted radical feminist themes deemed incompatible with the Catholic faith. And so the reform begins, a revamp that could span over 5 years. Changes will include rewriting the group's statutes, reviewing plans and programs, approving speakers, and ensuring they follow Catholic prayer and ritual. Seattle Archbishop Peter Sarton will manage the reform. Now, author Ann Carey has for years examined the intricate lives of American nuns. In her book, Sisters in Crisis, Ann discusses what she calls the tragic unraveling of women's religious communities. I spoke to Ann earlier about the Vatican's decision, and as is the case with all our guests, I learned a great deal about the intricacies surrounding this inquiry and gained valuable insight about a similar probe examining all American congregations for religious sisters. And just to give the issue size and scope, there are roughly 59,000 nuns in the U.S., according to a survey by Georgetown University. Now, the Leadership Conference for Women's Religious represents about 90% of these nuns, so it had to be imperative for this group to cooperate in order to gain a fair assessment of where they stand versus the allegations against them. What was the reaction to the apostolic visitation of women religious?
Well, first of all, that information that the LCWR likes to put out is somewhat incorrect. Yes, there are about, I think it's somewhere now, maybe between 55,000 and 59,000 sisters. But the LCWR membership is only 1,500 sisters. And they are the leaders of religious orders, about, there are something like 400 religious orders in the country, but the leaders, the orders these sisters lead, make up maybe 85% of the sisters. It's difficult to say that the LCWR speaks for these sisters because it really does not. It only speaks for its membership of 1,500, which is 3% of the sisters in the country. So it likes to say that it speaks for all those sisters, but it really only speaks for its membership. You see, the sisters within the orders don't have any vote in the LCWR. Just their leadership belongs. So I would say most of the leadership reacted very negatively to the visitation. In fact, there was quite a pushback led by the LCWR leadership against the visitation. But I know a lot of sisters in those orders who don't have any voice, any official voice, who were very much in favor of the visitation. And in fact, some of them told me they had written the Vatican and asked for a visitation.
And speaking of the Vatican probe that we are talking about today was launched about 4 years ago, and it was really to investigate the degree of secular influence on these religious orders, going so far as saying that there was some kind of overzealous feminist spirit that overshadowed traditional values. Now, the result, of course, a full-scale overhaul of the Leadership Conference. Now, you've written about this topic at length. Briefly, was this overhaul really necessary?
Well, first of all, we need to distinguish between the apostolic visitation of all the orders of women religious and this doctrinal assessment of the LCWR. The document that just came out of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith dealt only with a doctrinal assessment of the LCWR and did not involve the apostolic visitation. That outcome has yet to be discussed, and that was done under the auspices of a different curial office. and that was the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life. For shorthand, we just call it the Congregation for Religious. But so they're handling the apostolic visitation of all the orders, and that's separate from this LCWR doctrinal assessment that was handled by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and that's what just came out yesterday.
All right, and thank you so much for that clarification. I also want to go right to your book, Sisters in Crisis, which talks about the collapse of the Catholic orders of religious women in the post-conciliar period. Now, I find it fascinating that the book was written in 1997, which is more than 11 years before the investigation that we're talking about actually launched. So you were well ahead of this curve. And what did it take this long for the powers that be, so to speak, to act in such a decisive manner, at least with regard to the group we're talking about today?
Yeah, so we're talking about the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, which is this group of women superiors. I was telling you about 3% of the sisters. There's 1,500 of them. I think it was building up over all these years, really, because I traced the beginnings of this sort of growth away from the church by the Leadership Conference back to the early 1970s. There was a change in membership and leadership then, and new agendas were undertaken by the Leadership Conference that had more to do with the social justice agendas. And they kind of moved away from what had been a very closely knit relationship with the institutional church, where the sisters were kind of wanting to set their own agenda. Many of them were wanting to leave their traditional apostolic works of education and health care and catechesis to work directly with the poor. So a sort of a social justice agenda kind of took over what had been, definitely more of an ecclesial agenda. And over those years, the LCWR actually had a lot of stormy relationships with the Vatican. So it wasn't as though I were that much ahead of the curve. I think this is just a culmination of maybe 30 to 40 years of issues.
And we have not heard the last of this yet, have we?
Absolutely not. I have written and asked the LCWR for their reaction, and they have not yet issued one. I'm sure they want to put their heads together and come up with some sort of coherent reaction, and so we could be looking for that, I think, in the fairly near future.
All right, and thank you so much for helping us peel back the layers to this story. Again, your book is called Sisters in Crisis, The Unraveling of Women's Religious Communities, and it's published by Our Sunday Visitor, and it's available online. And thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Anne's book is available from Our Sunday Visitor along with Catholic and major booksellers. Now, as Anne mentioned, around the same time this doctrinal review of the Leadership Conference began, the Vatican ordered an apostolic visitation that looked at the quality of life of all orders of religious sisters. The results of that inquiry have not been released just yet. In a statement, the Leadership Conference said it was stunned by the conclusions of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The conference says its national board will meet to prepare a response. Stay tuned. The rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. Coming up later in the show, a Catholic academy in Douglaston thrives in a competitive atmosphere. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. U.S. bishops are calling on the country to lift its embargo of Cuba. In a letter to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the bishops say the U.S. should establish full diplomatic relations with Cuba and withdraw all travel restrictions to the island nation. Des Moines Bishop Richard Pate says by easing limitations, the U.S. will be supporting the people of Cuba in achieving greater freedom, human rights, and religious liberty. Bishop Pate says the U.S. would also be engaging a trading partner that will benefit American commerce. Meanwhile, Bishop Michael Bransfield of Wheeling, Charleston is denying sexual abuse allegations made against him. The allegations came out during testimony in an abuse case involving a Philadelphia priest who was a friend of Bishop Bransfield's. In a statement, the bishop says he never abused anyone and is being unfairly included in a group of priests who did commit abuse. Also revealed during the testimony, the priest on trial committed abuse at a home once owned by Bishop Bransfield. The bishop says that allegation is misleading since he was not aware of the alleged abuse and was not present at the house when the abuse is said to have taken place. Bransfield was a priest of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia at the time of the alleged incidences. He says the allegations were released to the media without his knowledge or input. In his statement, he asked for prayers for himself, the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston, and the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. The latest data from the Pew Research Center shows Republican Mitt Romney favored by some segments of the American electorate. According to the numbers, 73% of white evangelicals and 57% of white Catholics favor Romney over President Obama. The president won the overall Catholic vote in the 2008 election. Religiously unaffiliated Americans favor Obama over Romney, 56% to 37%. Some homosexual rights groups in Spain are calling for the prosecution of a bishop there after the bishop discussed the church's teaching on homosexuality during a Good Friday sermon. According to the website LifeSite News, the bishop associated the homosexual lifestyle with the suffering of hell. In a subsequent interview, the bishop said that homosexual tendencies can be cured through therapy. 3 homosexual groups accuse the bishop of inciting discrimination and hate. One of the groups has made a formal accusation, and the 2 other groups are reportedly planning to take similar actions. The Catholic League has its sights set on Daily Show host Jon Stewart. League President Bill Donahue is calling on Stewart to issue an apology for what Donahue says is a, quote, vulgar expression of hate speech. During a segment on Monday, The Daily Show displayed an image of a naked woman with a manger scene between her legs. The Catholic League says it will be asking The Daily Show's most consistent sponsors to pull their advertising. The league says its campaign will also include reaching out to every major Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Mormon, and Muslim leader and organization in the country and taking out ads in newspapers. Prison Fellowship Ministries founder Charles Colson is reportedly near death. In a statement, Prison Fellowship CEO says Colson will soon be home with the Lord. Earlier this month, Colson had surgery to remove clotted blood from the surface of his brain. Charles Colson was the first member of the Nixon administration to serve prison time in connection with the Watergate scandal. He had served as a special counsel to President Nixon. After being released from jail, he founded Prison Fellowship Ministries. He also was one of the co-signers of the 1993 document Catholics and Evangelicals Together. Well, she may have lived 700 years ago, but what she said is still relevant today. Rome Reports has that story.
Saint Catherine of Siena lived in the 14th century, but to this day her life is key in the history of the Catholic Church. She's the patroness of Italy and the co-patroness of Europe. Out of 33 doctors of the Church, there are 4 females, and she is one of them. The title is given to those who offered theological teachings that remain relevant regardless of time. This is one of the many reasons the International Center of Cateriniani Studies still looks into her teachings, including how they apply to the modern world. In fact, the center recently published a book which translates to The Service of Catherine of Siena's Doctrine. In it, 7 authors explain how her work influenced justice and peace, and even the field of communication. The book also includes documents by Paul VI and John Paul II, who wrote about her teachings. The so-called Cateriniani Studies Center is based in Rome. It organizes conferences and publications to further the legacy of Saint Catherine of Siena.
Stay tuned. There's more currents after the break. Coming up, 7 years later, a look back at the election of Pope Benedict. Welcome back. 7 years ago, the white smoke rose and bells rung in St. Peter's Square to signify the election of a new pope. Then the Cardinal Proto-Deacon emerged on the central balcony at St. Peter's Basilica to make the formal announcement that he and his fellow cardinals had elected Joseph Ratzinger as the successor to John Paul II. That was soon followed by the appearance of the new pope, who addressed the excited crowd who had been waiting with anticipation. Here now, Rome Reports gives us the sights, sounds, and reaction from that historic day.
Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum ag reverendissimum Dominum, Dominum Josephum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Ratzinger, qui sibi nomen imposuit Benedicti XVI.
Dopo il grande Papa Giovanni Paolo II, i signori cardinali hanno eletto me, un semplice, umile lavoratore nella vigna del Signore.
It's really exciting. It's a new page for the church, and I think he'll be a great pope. He's been a very pastoral in his approach to the church and in his teaching.
Well, he was the media favorite coming in. Everyone kind of expected him.
I was hoping it would be Ratzinger. I came over from London specially to be here this week. I'm delighted we made a choice very quickly. I think he will keep the orthodoxy of the church. I don't think that's ever been in question, but he will stick to the moral values which make the Catholic Church unique, and that's what we need to stand up for in a world which is changing, that there should be moral certainties.
And stay tuned, more currents ahead. When we return, despite some stiff competition, a Catholic academy in Queens thrives.
Being in District 26 is one of our biggest marketing challenges. It is an excellent school district all the way through. As a result, we need to be better than the public schools. It's not good enough to just be as good as the public schools. We need to be better.
Finally tonight, competition is certainly a part of life, whether it be on the athletic field, in the political arena, and even in the classroom. It's something the Divine Wisdom Catholic Academy in Douglaston, Queens has experienced firsthand. Despite some stiff competition from public schools in the neighborhood, the school is thriving, and it is our school of the week.
Divine Wisdom Catholic Academy is a very special place. Why? This is not your grandparents' Catholic school. One of the challenges is that we're located in Douglaston, Queens. And Douglaston, Queens is home of the #1 school district in New York City.
Being in District 26 is one of our biggest marketing challenges. It is an excellent school district all the way through. As a result, we need to be better than the public schools. It's not good enough to just be as good as the public schools. We need to be better.
We believe in professional learning. Just because you're now a certified teacher doesn't mean the learning stops. Smart teachers, smart adults make smart kids.
There's always something new coming out, a new method, a new idea that can benefit the children. You can't stay one way for 15, 20 years. It's not going to work. It won't be effective teaching.
Our teachers are constantly going out into other schools, PD workshops, to learn the new innovative ways that kids learn. We're also well aware of it. Every student doesn't learn the same way.
We've pretty much thrown out a one-size-fits-all approach, and we celebrate diversity. Diversity of learners, diversity of learning.
You're teaching 25 to 30 different learners, and you almost have to have 25 to 30 different lesson plans tailored around to each individual learner.
The board is very involved to our benefit.
The advantage of an academy model is that it brings more individuals in on a volunteer basis to help with the running and managing of the school. In this day and age, we don't have the luxury of the numbers of priests that we had many years ago, and so it's time to let the pastors focus on running the parish and keeping Catholic churches and Catholic parishes alive and well, and allowing the schools to run themselves with oversight from those pastors.
The board of directors at Divine Wisdom are a phenomenal group of men and women. They're not the type who just come in once a month for a perfunctory meeting.
We're willing to do a lot for our students. This is something that as board members we believe in. Everybody on our board has either had children who are alumni of this school or are alumni themselves. Their experiences here were wonderful. They want that to continue for many generations to come.
I'm not your typical Catholic school educator. This is my 31st year in education, but the first 29 I spent in various roles in the New York City Department of Ed.
He has taught us a lot about education, where it needs to go, and what we need to do to challenge our teachers and make them the best teachers possible so that our students get the best education possible.
We have a sense of community here and a sense of faith here. It is the only place in Douglaston where you can go and learn about math and science. You'll also learn about the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Catholic education is important because all students have the right and should have the ability to attend an education that is steeped in moral values and traditions.
I've always felt most comfortable in this kind of environment. It's what I grew up in. I went to Catholic school for everything from nursery to college.
We want students to have religion embedded in every subject that they learn and Christ's values in every subject, in everything that they do every day.
Divine Wisdom has a bright future. Every year our enrollment's growing. Everyone's learning. The school community was just the best kept secret in Douglaston.
I've been in thousands upon thousands of classrooms over the years involved in education. I would say proudly that I would be happy to have my children in this school with any of these teachers.
I feel like I'm doing a better job than I ever did before. The past 3 years have been a much different experience than the previous.
To work with such a dedicated faculty and staff, I know that the students are going to just flourish.
And that has been really the driver that has allowed this school to be so successful and to really meet the needs of all of the students.
And that is all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, the diocese opens its hearts and lends its hands to immigrants from around the world. We'll go into the deep to talk about it with Bishop DeMarcio. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. You can also connect with us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a good night.